how can we stimulate the needed chance so that we can achieve our goals? We believe that it's very important to harness the power of markets. The power of markets in order to achieve a rapid transition to resource efficiency. By harnessing the power of market, it does not mean that we are going to do business on our own, that we have really to indicate how markets should develop. But we think that as policymaker we have a role to set the exact framework to stimulate these measures and also to create incentives. This is why we have, within the European Union, we have a policy to decouple the economy around 3 axes, which I would briefly explain. First of all, we want to make sure that prices reflect the true value of our resources. And by that I mean that we cannot afford to have inefficient subsidies and tax distortions. And there are many subsidies in the world which are not efficient. The International Energy Agency estimates that there are energy subsidies worldwide of about $550 billion a year. And that maybe not all of them are inefficient, but a big part of inefficient. And it will take courage to change, to abolish these subsidies or to do some tax changes. But I think this is a test to do it. The moment is there. Secondly, a second axe of our policy is that we need large, attractive markets to stimulate investments and innovation. This again is the experience of the European Union. We have created a European Union single markets with a lot of energy and environmental policies which are developed at the European level. I would like that I have more time to give you examples, but we have set very strict standards. And to give you one example, we have developed standards, new rules on motors for cars to have cleaner motors for cars. And according to our estimates, this will save the equivalent of the entire annual electricity consumption of Sweden. We have a lot of also standards for consumers to guide consumers, as was indicated by the previous speakers, and we do also a lot in the field of public procurement, also that they should use more services and products which are green. A third axe of our policy is to promote, somebody mentioned it here, intelligent infrastructure. We need the adapted infrastructure for a more efficient economy. This, for example, if we are promoting electricity cars, we also should have the sufficient infrastructure for recharging points for electricity cars. But also transport, aviation has been mentioned many times here. For the European Union, we are strongly pleading that also the emissions of civil aviation should be included in the emissions, which is for the moment, we are the only regions pleading for it, and it's a real problem. So the necessary infrastructure has to be created. We are spending quite a lot of money, finances within the European Union to promote the infrastructure, and we have particularly our European Investment Bank, which spends billions of grants and lending to promote specific actions which are climate change friendly. So we are striving to get a low carbon society model, and therefore we have been developing at the European level a European economic growth strategy, which is called the European 2020 strategy, which includes explicit goals for fighting climate change and for promoting resource efficiency. So there are a lot of improvements which are being done, but we are still at the beginning of the road. Again, we are very pleased with this conference, which we hope will also contribute of bringing a lot of solutions and encouragement and enthusiasm to achieve our goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Now it's our chance to hear from you. If you have a question, please stand up. We'll bring you a microphone. If you need that question translated, be happy to do that as well. Yes, sir.
Yes, I think I will need translation for my question. Is open to anyone in the board that want to comment on it. And la pregunta es la siguiente. La huella de carbono que se está dejando en algunas partes es muy fuerte y no sé cómo se pueda medir. En algunas partes sucedió que tenemos un problema con el petróleo derramado en el Golfo de México y eso crea un impacto muy grande en muchas regiones en Estados Unidos y en México, en los puertos de México. A mí me gustaría saber cómo se puede mitigar ese efecto y si hay algunos productos que puedan ayudar a limpiar el Golfo de México. Por otra parte, también me gustaría saber si tienen alguna idea en el desarrollo de nuevos productos e innovaciones sobre la mejora que pueden existir en impacto en el carbono. Por ejemplo, en Stanford han hecho muchas innovaciones, pero me gustaría saber cómo pueden medir exactamente el impacto de un producto en eficiencia en uso de productos y de desempeño para el medio ambiente. A mí se me hace muy difícil cuando hacen algún producto poder medir el impacto en el carbono que tiene ese mismo producto para la sociedad. Gracias.
Okay, the question is, we know how important the footprint is, how strong it is, but my question is, how can we measure it? And for example, there was a spill of oil in the Gulf of Mexico as well. How can we measure that impact? And how can we mitigate, which are the types of different products we could use in order to mitigate this type of impact? And something that is very important as well for me is which are the different products which are being innovated and created and to fight carbon footprint, and how can we measure its benefit or its impact, the impact of all these new products.
Someone want to start?
Sure, I'll mention that the impact of a lot of the innovations won't only be on carbon, they'll be on other industries or other impacts. For example, we turn flue gas into concrete. That also eliminates about 32 billion tons of mining a year that's currently done, and the transport of all that rock from one location to another. So even though our real intent is to reduce the CO2 emissions from coal-fired power plants and replace the need for Portland cement, which are the second and third largest contributors to anthropogenic CO2, an effect of what we do is also to eliminate an enormous amount of mining. There's actually 7 times as much mining of rock as there is the mining of coal. And almost all rock mining is open pit. And it's a non-sustainable practice, which we have the ability to completely eliminate while we're mitigating CO2. We also have an impact on water. We produce enormous amounts of fresh water. So I think a lot of disruptive technologies will do things that we're not accustomed to beyond just mitigating CO2.
And I would add, in many cases, we're looking at electrical consumption as a precursor or as an indicator for carbon emissions. But as you look broader and as we start talking about many of the transformative solutions, all of a sudden it's cars that don't have to make trips anymore, or shipping vehicles, or even changes in routes and logistics. So part of the challenge is identifying what those trade-offs are, what those impacts are, and then how do we measure them and how do we quantify them. All that being said, I'll go back to what Dennis said at the very beginning. There's one school of thought that says if you can't measure it very, very accurately with a great degree of detail, why bother? I adopt the other strategy, which is the more we measure it and the more we try to get more and more accurate, the better measurement schemes will be out there so that we can really quantify some of these impacts.
But John, I think there's a dilemma here. I mean, when we measure the footprint of a service, we have to look across the whole value chain, the whole life cycle of that. And the danger is that it takes forever to go down very complicated supply chains in very granular detail to come out with the answer. So we've got not only to have a set of metrics that are robust, but also are practical to use and focus on the material aspects of this. And the other thing that I think is important here is to take account of what are called the rebound effects, which is where a saving in one place might actually stimulate a consumption in another place. And we've got to be absolutely sure that when we do these measurements that we're actually accounting for that. And it's part of the policy framework, I think, to make sure that these rebounds are minimized as much as possible.
Absolutely. We have time for one more question. I think we have a gentleman right here with a microphone. Please, sir, stand up. Thank you.
This is a question for the European ambassador. I was wondering the fact that the U.S. is quite reluctant to take on aggressive treaties and targets, like you mentioned with the Europe, might actually lead the European Union to also backtrack. Do you see such a thing happening?
So what was the last part of your question?
Do you see the impact of the U.S.
Yes.
reluctance to sign climate agreements leading to a backlash in Europe where you might actually regress from pursuing such policies?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a remark on the previous question about the measurement. Just I was very pleased to note when I entered here to see that this is a carbon neutral event. Actually, we organized, my office last week organized a big meeting here in Mexico concerning also climate change, and it was also a carbon neutral event. So we, at the end of the meeting, we were measuring the emissions caused by the event. And not to the surprise of everybody, we saw that we had a lot of emissions caused by the flights because we had a lot of people brought over, but also a lot of the emissions caused by electricity. Because we were like here, we were locked up in a room for 2 days with a lot of lights, a lot of air conditioning. So I think that maybe for future events, and when you intend to organize a carbon neutral event, there might be other measures to take. In effect, it's very important, the measurement, and some things you even don't have to measure, but they are quite absurd. If, for example, I come back to the aviation transport, which is causing quite a lot of emissions, and which I said until now is, beside the European Union, who wants to take them into account for the emissions, it's not being done. But in Europe, and I don't know how it's here, but sometimes you have practices that, because to ensure that the consumers get products the whole year round, we import flowers coming from Europe, coming from Africa, some vegetables coming from Latin America. We have the crazy situation where we have these shrimps from the North Sea, which are transported to Asia or to Africa to be peeled and to be transported again in Europe. And you only have to not only to calculate the cost of the emissions by the flights, but even to the cooling system and everything. So I mean, there are quite a lot of absurd systems, but the measurement, of course, is important. When we speak about measurement as European Union in the framework of climate change, we speak about a kind of monitoring of the efforts that we'll be doing. And the monitoring of the efforts in emission reduction, we call it an MRV system, monitoring, reporting and verification, which we hope will be one of the outcomes also of the Cancun. To come to the question on the position of the US, of course, we know that also with the current administration there are some particular efforts being taken, but it's a very weakness of the US system not to have a legislation in place. And we hope that with the current administration there will be enough efforts done to get a binding legislation on it, because we need to get the US on board when we will want to have also a global and successful outcome from the climate change talks.
Please join me in thanking our panel for their insights and expertise today.